Well, we're really happy to welcome Maria Divanzo to Corruption, Crime, and Compliance. Maria is the Chief Evangelist Officer at Traliant, and I'm really happy to have Maria here. And before I welcome her, let me give everybody a little bit of a background about Maria. Maria was appointed in July 2022, as the CEO or Chief Evangelist Officer at Traliant, which is an online compliance training provider that helps thousands of organizations to foster safe, ethical cultures of respect and inclusion with behavior-based solutions. And as the CEO, let's just say Maria is the CEO, is responsible for listening to customers, improving the customer experience at Traliant, and she brings over 15 years experience in creating ethics and compliance programs at global organizations. She's a recognized leader in ethics and compliance and brings deep expertise to elevate Traliant's thought leadership and delivery of valuable products and services to the marketplace. Now, prior to joining Traliant, Maria served as the Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer and Chief Privacy Officer for Cushman & Wakefield, a global leader in commercial real estate services. And she implemented an enterprise compliance and ethics program and created a global data privacy program with a focus on GDPR and California Consumer Privacy Act. And prior to that, Maria served as Deputy Chief Compliance Officer of AIG Asset Management. Welcome, Maria. We're so happy to have you join us today, and that's quite an impressive background.
Thank you, Michael. I'm really happy to be here, and I appreciate that introduction. Thanks so much.
And I was saying to you before we got started, one of the things, Maria, that I just find valuable about speaking to people in your position as a CEO and Chief Evangelist Officer, which I really like that title. It says a lot about your company and your role, is that you've done the hard work as a Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer, and now you have the opportunity to sort of bring solutions to people you know in the industry and people to try and help them. And I will say one other thing that I always say about the compliance industry, it's an incredibly collaborative profession. People help each other all the time. And so I sort of just wonder what you're bringing that perspective to people. How do you see your role and the value in that? Because you've been in the trenches there trying to get a program implemented and working.
Yeah, no, it's a completely unique perspective, of course, that I have. And I take a lot of what I know for granted, right? I'll be in conversations with our teams internally and external customers, and I'll be able to just bring to them my experiences, my expertise. And it's just so simple for me to do that, right? And so I think it'll be really beneficial for both the company and more importantly, our customers. I mean, I've only been there for 2 months, right? And already it's just, I've had a lot of really great, deep, meaningful conversations with them. So it's really great. I'm having a lot of fun.
And what, since you were in the trenches and whatever, what was it that led you to Traliant?
Yeah, I have a long-standing relationship with my Chief Executive Officer, CEO, John Arendis. And so John and I chatted in January, and he told me that he was thinking about this role. And it just seemed like such an interesting way to leverage my career. I'd been at Cushman for 10 years, and I put the program in place, and it was time for a new challenge, right? New change, and John presented that, and I made the move.
And I already saw you had an article published on corporate compliance just recently, and I see you as sort of a thought leader in the ethics and compliance space. But I mean, how do you see your role in terms of as the CEO? Let's call you the CEO. I like that. But in terms of, because you are a thought leader, you're putting out there ideas, which I think is going to generate a lot of interest, but also how do you then bring that to specific clients or specific companies that you're working with?
Yeah, sure. So there's really 3 legs to this stool that is this CEO position that we've created, right? One is the thought leadership. The other is lending credibility to our sales team, educating our sales team on the products, etc., and listening to the customer. So I've joined a couple of customer calls to hear what they're saying about the product. What is it that they'd like to see? And then I work with our content team on the content that we currently have, how to enhance it. make it better, add some features that customers are actually asking for, and then sharing with them some ideas of what I'd like to see when I was a buyer. What would
Right.
I have loved to have
Right.
seen, right? So it's those three legs of the stool that really make up the role.
One thing that I think is really important in your role, and I know you do this because everybody in compliance does it, is when I deal with clients on legal and compliance issues, they always want to know, where do we stand? What do you see people doing? They want like some benchmarking ideas. And are we doing okay? And there's sometimes where you can reassure people that I've seen this, I've seen a lot of people do this, and you guys are handling this the right way. But people sort of want to know where they stand a lot of times because they're so busy working on their program. Do you see like a role for yourself in that way in terms of working with clients?
Yes, to some extent, certainly sharing best practices. We're trying to develop
Right.
a compliance advisory council, and we've reached out to several of our clients to say, are you interested in this? And I would share that, like a board or a council, in which they could come and we could talk about that, benchmarking, best practices. What have I seen? How have I seen it done? Because to your point, compliance is one of the most collaborative groups of folks that I've ever
Right.
worked with. I started my
A
career
lot better than lawyers. A lot
Oh
better
yeah,
than lawyers.
I was about to say I started my career as a trial lawyer, and that was not the
Yeah,
case, right? So
yeah, exactly.
so yeah, that collaboration and perhaps formalizing it, right, within a framework.
Right. Well, I love the idea of throwing together a council because when you bring people together, good ideas come from that. And I think it helps your company as well, just to learn as much as you can from people and what they need. And usually they're good ideas that sort of flow in the industry from that. So I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Well, Maria, one thing we have to turn to sort of the Justice Department recently with its new corporate enforcement policy, with the evaluation of corporate compliance programs. And to me, it's a welcome sign to see the Justice Department. I kind of feel like they were a little slow to get on the bandwagon of the importance of corporate culture and ethics, but they're finally here. And I sort of want to get two thoughts. Obviously, you're a leading training provider, and training obviously plays a critical role in creating a culture of compliance and maintaining it and even monitoring it, but also to get your thoughts generally on corporate culture and the importance of that and how you guys fit into helping people to create this corporate culture.
Yeah. So corporate culture is key to having effective compliance.
Right.
If you have a culture in which, for instance, people are afraid to speak up, right? Because they're afraid of retaliation, that's just not going to lend itself very well to what now the DOJ is looking companies to look like, behave like, feel like, right? And is a key part of that, creating that culture of compliance, because communicates to employees the fact that the company takes this seriously, right? And so what do I mean by that? You just roll out off the shelf training where there's nothing really special about it. It's the same thing year after year. It's boring. It's not, tailored. It's not specific. And an employee's going to react and say, the company doesn't care. They don't really care about this. The employees aren't stupid. They can see that it's off the shelf and it's sort of a box checking exercise, right? But if you roll out communications and training that, and I'm going to use the word tailored, not customized, right? Because what we do at Traliant is really tailored. If it's tailored to the organization, to the industry, to the diversity of the employees that you have in that organization, right? And I mean going beyond colors and logo and a copy of the code of conduct. I'm talking about you have a CEO message in the beginning, right, from your company CEO, and you have pictures and graphics that come out of the company itself, maybe from their marketing group, on the website or what have you. And you're talking about a hotel. You put the scenarios in the context of people that work within a hotel, right? The maids, the customers, what have you. And with regard to whatever specific issues your company is addressing, now employees say, wow, that took some effort, right? It took some resources. Right. The company really cares about this. Leadership means what it says. And so people start to feel better about participating in that compliance program. And that adds to a better culture, which will help improve all of the other things that the DOJ is looking for, in my opinion.
Wow. Let me tell you, I know now why you're the CEO, the evangelist, because you hit every, I mean, you couldn't have said it any better and more fittingly. I'll tell you, like one time I have a client where somebody wrote in response to the training, they said, okay, I understand our values and I understand, but I have no idea what does that mean to my job and what I do every day. And what you're saying is put a lot of thought and effort into tailoring the message so that you do answer that question. Here are our values and here's what it means. Like an example in the hotels, you may run into this situation. Here's what we expect you to do or would like you to do. And here's why. I mean, that's what you're saying in a sense, right? To answer that question.
Exactly right. We give them the guidance ahead of time on how they might handle a particular situation that is meaningful to them, right? Because otherwise, Michael, it's tone deaf. Okay, if I roll out office-based training to somebody that's working out in a plant somewhere, right, or in a hotel, that's not helpful. That's checking the box, and the DOJ is going to see right through that, right? They're going to know
Exactly.
they're not stupid people either. They're very smart people. And so they're going to know you're just doing it to just say, okay, we got it done. Cross that off, right? But it didn't mean anything.
But that, and they've made some general statements about this, but what you're saying is like, take your training and take it to a new level. So I'll give you one example that I love. I actually was asked to speak at the national meeting of accounts payable people. Okay. In the entire country at Disney World. All right. I mean, it was a lot of fun. But I will tell you this, what I learned from that was if we train and put a training program together for accounts payable people, they're ready to help compliance. They're ready to look for red flags in invoices, in payments, in everything, and they'll escalate it up. And so what you're saying is tailor the training to the audience and make it meaningful to that audience. So then you'll have ambassadors or allies in your battle, which is like accounts payable. You know what I'm saying? And
I do. Yeah.
And so I've been asked by clients, okay, can you put together training slides and presentation for accounts payable? To me is why weren't they thinking that way a long time before? And what you're saying is start to think of your audience.
That's right. Start to think of your audience. The DOJ expects that as well. And that's part of your risk assessment, right, Michael? You're not going to just roll out anti-bribery and corruption training, for example, necessarily to everyone, unless you need to create a baseline, right? So when I was in the chair as a CCO, Cushman, I built the program from the ground up, and they never had done any anti-bribery training. So year one, when we rolled it out, I rolled it out to everybody who was tech enabled in order to create a baseline of understanding
of knowledge,
of knowledge of the issue, right? And then the following, I think we did it every other year. The next time we did it on a risk basis. So, for example, which business lines created the most risk?
Exactly.
Right? And the geography. It went out in India. It went out in China. It went out in Brazil, right? But it didn't necessarily go out into my administrative people in Kansas. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
But that may, and then are you saying that going from your experience before, you get a baseline, but then you're saying you tackle discrete groups based upon their risk profile. In other words, if there's a high risk operation in India, you would do a certain level of training for them on top of the basic for the next year or whatever. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. From a program perspective, right? When you're trying to decide what your program looks like, because you and I both know the reality is compliance typically has very limited resources, right? And so you need to make the most out of what you have and have the most impact. And I think if you had a problem, if the company had a problem, I'd like to think that if the DOJ came in and they saw that that was the approach a chief compliance officer took, they would know that chief compliance officer understood what the company risk profile looked like and where they actually needed to mitigate risk, right? And therefore it's a real program and it's somebody who's knowledgeable about what needs to be done, as opposed to you could get anybody in the chair that just rolls out training broadly or rolls out comms broadly, but that's not an effective compliance.
Right. But and the idea of like off the shelf training, which isn't tailored, to me is just it's a recipe for disaster because people look at it and say, where's your risk profile? How did you come up with this? Why is your program like this in terms of your training?
Correct. And your message then is going to land a little bit better if it's done within a context that employees can actually identify. Oh yeah, I do that. That's the job that I do. Now it makes sense to me. Right?
Yeah. Let me raise an issue that I wrestle with a lot. And how do we in the training space, how do we make sure that people are learning what it is? And there's all this measurement of learning idea, but how do we make sure that people are really understanding it and getting the message beyond a simple check the box type of question? What does FCPA stand for? Something like that.
Well, one of the ways that we at Traliant are looking at it and what we're developing, I think we're about to come out with it, is what we call question level reporting, right? And so within our LMS, we have the capability to identify the number of attempts it took for an employee to get a particular question right. And we can pull reports out as which questions did this particular employee get wrong and how often, et cetera. And then we can send that information, that data to the compliance officer who then can use it for a couple of things. One, most obviously, send out supplemental training to that person.
Right. Or follow up.
Follow up. Exactly. Do some follow up with that person. And then they can also sort of at a more macro level, take that information and they can use it to inform their internal stakeholders, like internal audit, for example, where the risk areas are for the company, maybe risk management, right? Also, and equally as important, the board. You go to the board on a quarterly basis if you're CCO of a public company. Right. Now you can tell the board what you're seeing with regard to the question level reporting, the effectiveness of the training, what are they learning, and then how did we follow up? And as I sort of alluded to earlier, the allocation of resources. When you have a limited budget and a limited number of heads, if you are seeing that the guys and gals in your India operation within property management are consistently getting FCPA questions wrong, you might want to reorganize your compliance program so you have people that are actually on the ground there in India instead of in other parts of the business where they are getting the questions wrong, right? And so that's something we're coming out with. The other thing we do too is we survey learners after the training, and so they can answer questions about how likely are they to apply what they've learned to their business.
Terrific. So we have a survey type thing, right?
Yeah, exactly right. So those are some ways in which we're trying.
And that was where my client got that question, said, hey, I understand all this thing about values, but I don't get where it goes to my job. And that gives you a feedback loop that you can then address in some way. So that's interesting. So and I know this is kind of an open-ended question, but what I see now is our risk environment is broadening and broadening. I mean, not to date myself, but 10, 15 years ago, we were talking about anti-corruption risks. And that was the big one that everybody was dealing with. Now we have sanctions, which with the Russia and whatever. But we also have many other risks, that data privacy. I saw you were a data privacy officer. And in the ethics and compliance space, what are you learning about the current risk environment challenges? While you're talking to people, what's top of mind in terms of what are you seeing that people are really struggling with, and are they getting overwhelmed with sort of the risk environment?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of what you've already mentioned, right? Obviously, the anti-bribery corruption is always a big topic.
Right.
Data privacy and security, especially cybersecurity, is something that's keeping folks right. The whole world of ESG, right, and ESG reporting and having an ESG program is certainly something that compliance officers are struggling with. And how do they fit into that, right? ESG is a funny one because the other stuff that we talk about is singular related compliance officers, compliance function. It may be legal,
right?
But ESG, there's multiple stakeholders there, right? So now you've got to coordinate and collaborate with your HR partner, perhaps your sustainability to address some of those risks in those ESG buckets. And overarching all of it now is the fact that we're dealing with a much more aggressive DOJ.
Right.
Across the board, not just with regard to FCPA, right?
No, no,
So
no. More, I mean, they are out there. And I always say you can watch when you see resources put into things,
yep.
that means they're going to do something. But I also wanted to say, though, in terms of the risk environment, it just seems to me like cybersecurity is so big, data privacy has become bigger, and ethics and compliance they should have a role in all of those. Okay. But ESG to me, and I got a little bit of flack for this, I don't think that ESG should be the responsibility of a chief ethics and compliance officer. You can't put that whole program on their. But let's remember the G, which is governance, and also chief ethics and compliance officers sit in a unique place. They already see across the organization.
That's right.
They already know how to manage risk. And bringing in, so if they're not at the table for ESG, to me, that's a problem. They should be a valuable partner in that program. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm surprised that you would get flagged for that position because that's 100% spot on as far as I'm concerned. Right?
Yeah.
The way I've seen it is legal, the general counsel, right, sitting above compliance typically has the overarching responsibility, for ESG. But certainly the ethics and compliance person, group, whatever, needs to have a seat at that table. When I look at ESG reports, I see anti-bribery and corruption as one of the major areas that all of these companies are touting their efforts in. And so how do you report on that? How do you tout those efforts if your compliance team doesn't have a seat at that ESG team?
Exactly.
Yeah,
but also sustainability reports I've seen for years, going back to even the oil industry, they were giving hotline reports. Here's how many here's how many people we disciplined this year. We have a meaningful reporting system that helps to maintain our culture. So to me, these are all issues that compliance has to be at the table about. But I also think compliance people know how to deal with a lot of these issues. You know how to address risk based upon your job. And your job experience, and you know how to manage risks. And that's what we're talking about with ESG in a sense.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that assessment.
Yeah. Now you mentioned DOJ, and obviously DOJ has definitely made its mark. I had recently a talk with David Last, who's the head of the FCPA unit. And I said, so I understand there are more cases coming. He goes, there are definitely lots more cases coming. And they're emboldened right now. They've gotten more resources, more lawyers, more FBI agents assigned. And they're also embedded in the DOJ offices now, one squad is, to make it even easier for them to work together. But what do you see in terms of foreign bribery and mitigating these risks and staying on top of these? What do you see as some of the challenges in terms of foreign bribery issues?
Well, just for a moment, if I may, one of the of all the activities that they're engaging in with the DOJ and all of the enforcement enhancements, et cetera, one thing that really struck me, and they really mean it when they do this, not only are they adding resources, for the first time, really, they're adding compliance expert resources, right? So AAG Polite has a compliance background, and my understanding is, and I forget the company, but there was another individual they just hired, I think, to work.
Matt Galvin.
Yes,
Matt Galvin
right.
from Anheuser-Busch.
That's right.
Who I know.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, we all know them because Matt was doing great data analytics work.
He was.
And they put him in there to do data analytics.
That's right. And so that's a big, that's a big scene. That's a big message to bring in those folks. Because while if you don't have people that have my perspective, that have sat in the seat coming in to look at the program, like how well can they actually get it? Like, can they get it right if they haven't done it, right? But now you have people who've actually done it. So that's an observation I had. As far as challenges of mitigating risk, far-flung jurisdictions, doing work in a far-flung jurisdiction is really, really difficult. And as you probably know, local custom and practice is just a killer. Like if you're sitting in New York, Chicago, LA, DC, wherever in the US, and you're telling your folk on the ground in Sao Paulo or in India or in China that you can't do X, Y, or Z, in all likelihood, you're going to get a lot of, okay. But when you get the cases that come across your desk, and they will come to you, you look at them and you see what the heck happened, and what you hear is, oh, well, that's the way we do it down there.
That's the way we do it here.
Yeah. Yeah. So
One of I was just on a panel with the Andy Dunbar is his name, and he's the Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer at Herbalife. And they have a deferred prosecution agreement, and he's rebuilding the program.
Yep.
And what he told everybody, and I wanted to see if this idea resonates with you because you're talking about it in a way, is subcultures. He's finding out that within his company, a global company, what you're talking about in terms of subcultures, that there were local customs that were done, and that created a subculture to their entire global culture. And how do you address, and that to me seems like a hard issue. How do you address that? I mean, the proverbial case used to be, we want to give mooncakes to various government officials in China.
Or the red envelopes, right?
Or the red envelope. Yeah. And there's certain things that they just have, you want to try to work with them to make sure they can do certain things. But obviously there are things that they can't do.
Well, right. I mean, one of the things, for example, that I did when I was in the seat in China, you mentioned China. China was really a challenge when I got there, and I wrote out the anti-bribery and corruption policy, which, by the way, they did not have when I got there, even though they were doing business in 55 countries around the world, including China. I rolled it out and I sent it to my team on the ground. And I said, so what do you think? Does this work? Right? Because that's an important thing. It's got to work. And I got all kinds of pushback. This isn't going to work here. The mooncakes, the festival gifts, all of that. And we spent a lot of time creating a specific business courtesies policy for China, China only, China only, that had different thresholds for approvals, different allowable things, and for certain festivals, subject to review by the local compliance officer, etc. But the reality is you can't do that for every country. You know how many policies you're going to end up with that are just going to be completely impossible to
like you
manage.
Just said, you had 55 countries. Right. You can't have a separate one for each country.
You can't, but we thought China was high risk enough to do that for China. So you do need the policies. You need appropriate practices, right? I know you can't just have policies. You need practices, approvals, reviews, etc. The training and the communications, as we talked about earlier, appropriate controls built into company systems, right? So you talked a little bit about having the accounts payable people, I think, partner with you.
Right.
You need that as well. You got to give advice on how to handle issues and do the audits. But I got to tell you one thing that I would love to have seen when I was in the seat in a handful of jurisdictions, honestly, is to have a U.S. guy or gal overseeing that group for some period of time.
I agree with you.
Right?
I agree with you. You hit the nail right on the head, because what I've seen is when you have a local compliance officer, and it could be a U.S. person or just somebody that's going to adhere to whatever it is. It doesn't have to be a U.S. person, but is going to enforce and is part of the company. Then a lot of things can be sort of leveraged. You can create a relationship. That person can create a relationship that you can then build on as the chief compliance officer. Correct. You know what I mean? So,
absolutely.
Well, listen, we've come sort of to the end of the line here, but this is, Maria, I think you've given out a lot of great advice. And if people want to reach out to you to speak to you, I would encourage people to contact Maria. She's just a terrific resource in her new CEO role. How do they get in touch with you? What's the best way to reach you?
Yeah, the best way to reach me would be through LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, and so if you just want to connect with me there, that'd be great, and I would welcome that. So please do. Well,
Maria, thanks again. Terrific, great. Good luck in the new position. I know it's going to be a lot of fun for you. I can already sense all your energy, and you're ready to help people, and you have just a great spirit to you. And it's been a real pleasure to talk with you. And thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Michael. I really appreciate it.
Thanks again for listening to Corruption, Crime, and Compliance. Please subscribe to the podcast series. The Volkov Law Group believes that every company should have a robust ethics and compliance program. Experience and research show that ethical companies are better performers in the global marketplace. You can learn more about the legal and compliance services we offer at our website, www.volkovlaw.com. You can also follow our award-winning blog, Corruption, Crime, and Compliance, and our podcast series. You can contact Michael Volkov at his email address, mvolkov@volkovlaw.com.